My brother-in-law, married to my sister, confessed to my wife that he was in love with her. That set off a cascade of terrifying discoveries in our family. Can you even imagine the stomach-dropping horror of finding out your brother-in-law, a man you trusted like family, had been secretly obsessed with your wife for years? Because that's exactly the nightmare that dropped into our laps yesterday, and it started with a seemingly innocent lunch invitation. My wife told me about it, completely puzzled. "Do you think it's about my sister?" she asked, a little furrow in her brow. Maybe they're having problems, and he needs a woman's perspective. Honestly, I found the whole thing a bit odd. He'd never reached out to her specifically like that. But then again, he was always texting family about mundane things. We were a close family, right? Always there for each other. So I shrugged it off, trying to be reassuring. "Go find out," I told her, pushing my own flicker of unease away. The next morning, as she got ready for work, she brought it up again. "I'm still not sure what this is about," she confessed, a hint of worry in her voice this time. "It's probably nothing serious," I said, trying to convince us both. "Just listen to what he has to say. If it's something we need to help with, we'll figure it out together." Famous last words, right? She arrived early at a busy cafe near her office, picking a table by the window. Public safe. He showed up a few minutes later, looking nervous. More nervous than she'd ever seen him. They did the usual pleasantries, work, kids, all that. Then, as soon as their food arrived, he took a deep breath. And he just dove in. He started complimenting her. How beautiful she looked. At first, she thought he was just being polite. But then, he kept going. He told her she'd always been the light in his life. How she made him feel things he'd never felt before. "It was love at first sight," he practically whispered, his voice trembling. "I've loved you since the moment I first laid eyes on you. If you were mine, I would treat you like the queen you are. I'd give you everything you deserve." My wife was stunned, absolutely floored. She just stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. This man, my brother-in-law, my sister's husband, father of their 2 kids, he was pouring his heart out to her. He just laid it on thick, making these grand promises about how different life would be with them. He said he'd been holding these feelings in for years, watching her, admiring her from afar, convinced they were meant to be. She tried to interrupt, to tell him he was making a huge, huge mistake, but he just talked over her, like he'd rehearsed this speech 1,000 times. Now, you have to understand, this guy wasn't some stranger. He was the fun uncle to our kids. Always at every family barbecue, every holiday dinner. He texted my wife a lot, sure, but it was always about kid stuff, family events. Nothing ever sexual, nothing that would set off any alarms. He texted my mom, my younger brother too. We trusted him, implicitly. So when my wife recounted this to me, it was like a physical punch to the gut. She didn't let him finish, not really. She stood up, her chair scraping loudly across the floor, and just walked out. Shaking, she called me, telling me everything. As she was still on the phone with me, his texts started rolling in. First, apologies. He didn't mean it. Infatuation. Sorry for making her uncomfortable. But the damage was done. She left work early, came straight home, her phone buzzing incessantly with his calls and messages. I told her to answer one, put him on speaker. I needed to hear this myself. He was crying, begging her not to tell my sister. He kept saying it was a mistake, that he'd misread signals, that he thought she felt the same way. Apparently, the past weekend, he thought she was flirting with him, that they'd had a moment alone in our kitchen. My wife's a real ball buster. She teases everyone, and I guess I could see how someone might misinterpret that. But this was beyond anything we could have imagined. He asked if she'd told me. I just answered, yes, my voice tight. Silence on his end. Then he started begging me, pleading for us to keep this a secret. Him begging, us listening. My main question was, had he cheated on my sister before? He swore he hadn't. Swore on his kids' lives it was just my wife. You should understand, he said. It was her, only her. At that point, I was done. I told him I wasn't going to do anything tonight, but I'd call him tomorrow. Now we were left with this mess. My wife was ready to drive over there right then and tell my sister, but the idea of wrecking my sister's family? It was killing me. Thinking about what this would do to my nieces, it made me want to vomit. I knew the right thing was to tell my sister, but I was also thinking about my wife. It wasn't her fault, but there was sure to be resentment from family, even if my sister didn't divorce him. Even if they reconciled, how could we ever go back to how we were before? This whole episode, it could tear our family apart. I didn't give a damn about him. He tried to destroy my family, but I cared about everyone else. Well, everyone who told me last night that I couldn't wait to tell my sister was absolutely right. A little after midnight, my phone rang. It was my sister. She sounded upset. She said she had something to tell me. My heart just sank. She explained that her husband, my brother-in-law, had come to her in tears, claiming my wife had tried to begin an affair with him. He spun this whole twisted tale, painting my wife as the instigator, shifting all the blame onto her. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. No, I immediately told my sister. That's not what happened at all. I'll be right over. This needed to be face to face. I hung up and, with a growing sense of urgency, called my parents. I woke them both, explaining what was happening in quick, clipped sentences. My dad was furious. My mom sounded shocked, but her voice was firm. They agreed to head over to my sister's house, to sit with her kids, offering the support she'd desperately need. Then I called my younger brother. He groggily answered, confusion turning to alarm as I filled him in. He promised to come to our place, to stay with our kids, ensuring they wouldn't be alone. His calm, steady presence would be a comfort. Meanwhile, my wife was already gathering her things, her face pale and drawn. She was dreading the confrontation, but knew it was necessary. We left the house in a hurry. The drive to my sister's place felt longer than it actually was. The silence in the car was heavy, both of us lost in our thoughts. When we arrived, the scene was even more tense than I'd imagined. My sister was out on the front porch with my brother-in-law. He looked beaten, eyes downcast, his posture slumped in defeat. He knew we had the texts, the voicemails, the undeniable proof of his betrayal. I don't know what he was hoping to accomplish by calling my sister in the middle of the night with his lies. Maybe he thought he could get ahead of the story, twist the narrative to save himself. But it was a futile effort. As we walked up to them, the tension in the air was palpable. My wife was trembling, her face a mask of controlled anger and hurt. Without a word, she handed my sister her phone. My sister took it, her hand steady, but her eyes burning with a mix of fury and pain. She scrolled through the texts, her expression hardening with each one she read. Then she listened to the voicemails, the damning evidence of his declarations and my wife's firm refusals. Before she could even speak, my brother-in-law started sobbing, just completely broke down. This is a man who runs into burning buildings, who faces danger daily without flinching. Seeing him like this, broken and vulnerable, was jarring. His cries were deep and guttural, raw with regret and fear. It was almost surreal. A big, tough firefighter brought to his knees by his own actions. My sister's face remained impassive, a mask of stern resolve. She's always been tough, but right now she was unyielding. She waited for him to finish, her silence more powerful than any words. When he finally quieted down, still hiccuping with the remnants of his sobs, she spoke. "Pack a bag and go," she said, her voice cold and clear. "I can't stand to look at you." He tried to argue, to plead his case, but she was having none of it. "Stop it," she snapped, cutting through his words. "There's nothing you can say that will make this better." Then she turned away from him, walked over to my wife, and pulled her into a hug. It was a moment of solidarity between them, a small comfort in the middle of this nightmare. They'd been friends since college, and the strength of their bond was so evident. It was a relief to see that, despite everything, they were standing together. That left me standing with my brother-in-law. He was a wreck, his face red and swollen from crying, his shoulders slumped. He looked at me, his eyes pleading for some kind of understanding or forgiveness. But I had none to offer. He tried to speak, his voice cracking, but I cut him off. "You need to leave," I said firmly. "This is your mess. You need to deal with the consequences." He nodded, defeated, and slowly made his way inside to pack his things. My sister stayed with my wife, the two of them talking quietly, leaning on each other for support. The rest of the night was a blur of conversations and plans. We all rallied around my sister, helping her figure out what to do next, how to protect her kids from the fallout. My sister started questioning my wife, trying to understand why her husband thought any of this could possibly work out. He must have had some reason to believe she reciprocated his feelings, my sister insisted. She even said there hadn't been any issues in their marriage. Everything had been normal. My wife was crying at this point, tears streaming down her face as she tried to make sense of the situation. "There's nothing you haven't seen," she said, her voice shaking. She handed my sister her phone again, and together they painstakingly went through every text message sent over the past 2 years. They read each one carefully, looking for any hint of inappropriate behavior. But there was nothing. My wife was just being herself. She has a playful personality, always joking around and teasing. It's part of what makes her so lovable and approachable. My brother-in-law had a similar sense of humor, and they'd always teased each other in a light-hearted, harmless way. She does the same with my mom and my younger brother. It's just how she interacts with people. The only incident my wife could think of that might have been misconstrued happened that past weekend. She recounted it, trying to pinpoint where things went wrong. We were all together at our place, and she and my brother-in-law both reached for the fridge at the same time. They playfully jostled for who would get there first, laughing as they did so. He let her win, but then he reached around her waist to grab a beer, moving his hand slowly. She admitted that in that fleeting moment, the way he did it felt a little inappropriate. It was a fleeting feeling, and she brushed it off, not wanting to make a big deal out of it. She wonders now if her silence gave him some misguided hope. My sister listened, her expression softening. She didn't blame my wife for any of this. She knew her well enough to understand that her playful nature wasn't an invitation for anything more. "It's not your fault," she reassured her. And my wife nodded, though the guilt still lingered. As they finished reading through the messages, it was clear there was never any mutual attraction, no hidden signals or secret flirtations. My wife was just being herself, and my brother-in-law took that and twisted it into something it wasn't. The realization that this misunderstanding had caused so much pain was almost too much to bear. But at least for now, my sister's belief in my wife remained intact. Then my sister started going through his MacBook. She was angry and frantic at this point, her hands shaking as she typed. She guessed the password, and on the third try, she was in. With a deep breath, she started searching through his files, looking for anything that might shed more light on this nightmare. It didn't take long before she found something disturbing. Buried in a folder labeled innocuously were a lot of pictures of my wife. They dated back years, and what was more unsettling was that they were always isolated shots, just her, never in group settings or candid family moments. My sister clicked through them, her anger turning into a cold, creeping horror. One set of photos stood out. A few years ago, we went on a couple's trip to the Caribbean. It was a rare vacation without the kids, and my wife, feeling more relaxed in the adults-only environment, had worn a bikini. She usually doesn't prefer more modest swimwear, but this time she had felt comfortable enough to do so. There were probably 50 pictures of her in that bikini, each one taken without her knowledge. My sister's face paled as she scrolled through them. It was clear he'd been secretly snapping these photos for years, collecting them obsessively. The realization that he'd been harboring this fixation, lurking in the shadows of family events, sent a shiver down her spine. Does this now enter restraining order territory? She wondered aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. This had taken a creepy turn, far beyond what any of us had imagined. The boundary between inappropriate and outright disturbing had been crossed. She called us over, showing us the pictures. My wife gasped, her hand flying to her mouth in shock. She had no idea he was doing this, no inkling of his obsession. My sister, her anger now tempered by a deep sense of betrayal, started talking about next steps, legal action, protection for her kids, a restraining order, all possibilities that needed to be considered now. We were all reeling from this new discovery. The man we thought we knew, who we trusted as a husband, a father, and a brother-in-law, had shown a side of himself that was dark and disturbing. It wasn't just a matter of infatuation anymore. It was something far more insidious. Unfortunately, the mess continues. My sister agreed to talk to her husband last night and let him explain himself. She was determined to get the full story and decided to involve my wife directly to ensure there would be no lying or half-truths. They set up a FaceTime call with my wife, and I listened in off camera, my heart pounding with a mix of anger and dread. My sister, ever thorough, recorded the entire conversation for good measure. As soon as the call began, the tension was palpable. My brother-in-law looked exhausted, his eyes red-rimmed and swollen from crying. He started hesitantly, his voice shaky. But as he spoke, the truth began to pour out, and the story unfolded in a way none of us had fully anticipated. He admitted he's been obsessed with my wife for years. It started the day I met her, he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. He went on to explain that it was during one of those early gatherings where my sister, eager to introduce her new boyfriend to her friends, had brought him along. My wife and I were dating at the time, but he had met her before he met me. At first, he thought his feelings were purely physical, an innocent crush that he could brush aside. But as time went on, and he spent more time around her, he realized it was more than that. He became fixated on her personality, her laughter, the way she interacted with everyone around her. He described moments where he found himself watching her, captivated by her presence, even as she was just being herself, playful and kind. He detailed how he had tried to suppress these feelings, convincing himself that they were harmless. But over time, his obsession grew. He started finding ways to be near her more often, volunteering to help with family events, making excuses to text her about trivial things. It was a slow, insidious process that eventually led to the point where he felt compelled to confess his feelings, deluding himself into believing she might feel the same way. My sister listened, her face a mask of controlled rage and heartbreak. She didn't interrupt him, letting him dig his own grave with each word. My wife, on the other hand, was visibly shaken, hearing how long this had been going on, how deeply his obsession ran, was almost too much for her to bear. When he finished, there was a heavy silence. My sister finally spoke, her voice icy and measured. "What made you think that my wife would leave me for you?" she asked, her eyes boring into his. He stammered, struggling to find the right words. He mentioned the supposed mutual attraction, the moments he had misinterpreted as signs of her reciprocation. My wife and sister just exploded at that point, their pent-up anger and frustration spilling over. There was a lot of cussing, a lot of screaming, the raw emotion of betrayal and hurt coming to the forefront. My wife hung up the call, her hands trembling, her face pale. She was so concerned for me, for us, assuring me repeatedly that the attraction was one-sided. I believed her. I always had. Even if she did find him physically attractive at some point, I knew she would never act on it. She's serious about trust and fidelity, something she made clear early on in our relationship. I remember watching her one morning as she was dressing, admiring her without saying a word. She noticed, gave me a teasing smile, and asked if I liked what I saw. But then her expression turned serious, almost cold. "Never screw up," she said, her tone leaving no room for misunderstanding. "Or you'll never see this again." She meant every word. My wife is serious about trust. Once it's broken, it's almost impossible to mend. This whole ordeal was a twisted fantasy of my brother-in-law's, a dangerous delusion that had nearly torn our family apart. As I sat there replaying the chaotic scene in my mind, I couldn't help but reflect on my brother-in-law. I knew he was a little cocky, always walking with a certain swagger, but my God, I never knew he thought so highly of himself to believe he could pull off something like this. His delusions of grandeur were staggering, completely detached from reality. I talked to my sister later on, once the initial shock had started to wear off and we could speak more calmly. She was resolute, determined to protect her children from the fallout of her husband's actions. She told me she would be contacting a lawyer first thing Monday morning to see what steps she could take to limit his exposure to their kids. She wanted to ensure that they were shielded from as much of this mess as possible. "As far as I'm concerned, he's detached from reality," she said, her voice steely with resolve. Her concern was no longer about saving her marriage, but about safeguarding her children and maintaining a semblance of stability for them. Anyway, my brother-in-law returned home yesterday. Not because my sister wants him back, but because she can't legally stop him. Despite the turmoil and the clear betrayal, he has the right to be in the house until the legal proceedings move forward. The atmosphere is tense and uncomfortable, filled with unspoken words and palpable resentment. They are done, and I think he realizes that now. There's a hollow look in his eyes, as if he understands that any hope he had of salvaging their marriage is gone. The lawyer tells my sister that since my brother-in-law's behavior over the past few days has been documented, there's a good chance she will be granted full custody of the kids. The texts, voicemails, and that disturbing cache of photos all paint a clear picture of his obsession and instability. He doesn't seem to even want to fight her on that. It's as if he knows he's lost everything and is too weary to put up a battle. My sister will be fine. She's stronger than she looks, and any love she had for him is gone. She moves through the house with a determined air, her focus now entirely on her children and their future. She doesn't seem to be broken up about it. Rather, she looks like someone who's finally seen the truth and is ready to move forward. The kids don't know what happened yet. They sense something is wrong. Kids always do, but they don't know the details. My brother-in-law was never around much anyway. When the kids were home, he often slept at the fire station, pulling double shifts and overtime. His absence was a constant in their lives, a silent but ever-present gap that they had grown used to. But it is certain to be hard on them once they know what's going to happen. The stability of their home, the presence of both parents, even if it was fractured, will change. My sister is prepared for this. She's already spoken to a child psychologist to help them navigate the inevitable questions and emotions that will arise. She's ready to be both mother and father, to provide them with the love and support they'll need. As for my brother-in-law, he stays in the guest room, a silent figure in a house that no longer feels like his home. He seems resigned to his fate, going through the motions, but devoid of any real fight. It's a sad, pitiful sight, but my sympathy is limited. Some of my friends have said that there must be more women, that someone as obsessive as my brother-in-law couldn't have fixated on just one person. But as far as we can tell, there hasn't been anyone else. It's really just the obsession with my wife. His fixation on her has been singular and intense, leaving no room for anyone else. After everything came to light, my wife blocked his phone number, trying to create some distance and protect herself from his unwanted advances. But on the same night he returned home, he sent my wife an email from an account he had just made. It started with a seemingly sincere apology, but it quickly took a turn into something much darker. He began by saying he never got to finish at the restaurant that day, implying there was more he needed to confess. Then he launched into paragraphs and paragraphs about all the things he loves about my wife. He detailed the desperation he felt, the overwhelming emotions that had driven him to act so irrationally. He recounted every little detail he admired about her. Her smile, her laugh, the way she interacted with others. It was unsettling, to say the least, to see his obsession laid out so starkly. He mentioned their supposed mutual attraction again, insisting that there was a palpable sexual tension between them that he had always felt. He was delusional, mistaking her friendly, playful nature for something more. He painted a picture of a connection that existed only in his mind, a fantasy that he had convinced himself was real. The email ended with a rather large section about me. Let's just say I didn't know he had such a low opinion of me. He was quite certain that I was not satisfying my wife properly. He criticized everything from my appearance to my demeanor, implying that I was somehow unworthy of her. His words were meant to undermine me, to sow seeds of doubt and insecurity. Reading the email was a gut punch. It was clear that his obsession with my wife had twisted his perceptions and fueled his disdain for me. He saw me as an obstacle, someone unworthy of the woman he had placed on a pedestal. But instead of feeling threatened, it only solidified my resolve to protect my wife and my family from his delusions. We forwarded the email to my sister and her lawyer. It was more evidence of his unstable state of mind, another piece of the puzzle that showed just how far gone he was. This email, with its mix of apology, obsession, and vitriol, might be enough to get him removed from the house permanently. For now, my wife and I are taking it one day at a time. The support from our friends and family has been invaluable, helping us navigate this surreal and painful situation. My wife isn't doing great, but she is improving each day. She does feel guilty for being too comfortable around my brother-in-law. Normally, she is very careful about setting boundaries with other men. In case it wasn't clear, my wife is quite stunning and receives a lot of male attention. However, she felt safe around my brother-in-law because he was family and she never thought he would cross any lines. Fortunately, she and my sister are on good terms, and there doesn't seem to be any resentment, which is a relief. We will all be okay, but it will take time. My primary concern throughout this was always my sister and her children. The impact of my brother-in-law's actions on their lives is immense, and ensuring their protection and emotional well-being became our absolute priority. Children, especially, need shielding from such toxic situations to maintain their sense of security and normalcy. When faced with a situation like this, it's essential to act quickly and decisively. We didn't hesitate to gather evidence, confront the issue, and involve legal help to ensure the safety and well-being of everyone involved. Procrastination or denial could have led to further harm. What do you think about this story? Have you ever had someone you trusted betray you like this? Tell me what you think in the comments below. I really want to know.